The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 1. How the Earth First Felt the Footsteps of Humans. Long before cities, before walls, before fire met metal, there were feet, bare feet. The early people of the world walked softly over the earth, their soles toughened by dust, stones, and seasons. The ground was both their path and their teacher. Every step told them something. If the soil was dry, the air would soon crackle with heat. If the mud was cool, the rain had passed not long ago. They walked across grasslands, through sharp gravel, over frozen soil and glowing sand. The world beneath them was wild and endless. But their feet, though strong, could only bear so much. When winter winds howled and snow bit like knives, they huddled by the fire, wrapping their feet in furs or bark, not to look pretty, but to survive. That small act, a strip of hide tied around a human foot, might have been the very first shoe. No one knows exactly when it happened, but archaeologists, the quiet storytellers of the earth, have found clues buried under dust and time. In a dark cave in Armenia, a single leather shoe was found, shaped and stitched more than 5,000 years ago. It was small, about the size of a modern woman's shoe. The leather was soft, worn by time but still whole. Whoever made it must have cared for it, must have known the comfort it brought. That shoe was not decoration, it was protection, warmth, survival. But shoes existed even before that. In places like Oregon in the United States, ancient sandals woven from sagebrush bark were discovered. They were more than 10,000 years old, older than the pyramids, older than the wheel. They were made by hands that had no machines, only patience and instinct. Thin strips of plant fiber were twisted and crossed, forming a shape that held to the foot. Simple, but clever. When you think of it, that's how humans have always worked. When something hurts, we find a way to soften it. The people of those early days didn't have fashion. They didn't care for styles or colors. They had one goal: survive the night and wake up tomorrow. And yet, in their quiet way, they were artists. Each piece of leather, each knot of rope was made with thought. They learned which plants could be woven tight and which would snap, which hide stayed soft and which cracked when dry. Imagine them, sitting by a fire at dusk, the sky turning amber. A small group of people, tired from walking, cutting pieces of hide with stone flakes. They'd talk softly, maybe laugh, maybe stay silent, only the crackle of fire filling the air, the smell of smoke, the feel of fur, the sound of night animals. That was their world. Someone ties a thin cord around their ankle, pulls the hide snug, and stands. They take a few steps. The ground feels different. Not so sharp, not so cold. The others watch. They see the idea work. That night, maybe more of them try it. And so the first idea spreads. The idea of a shoe. It wasn't an invention like the wheel or fire. It was quieter, smaller, more human. It came not from genius, but from need. Over the centuries, that simple thought, let's protect our feet, grew and changed like the people who wore them. When early humans began to travel far across mountains, deserts, and snow, shoes became more than comfort. They were tools for survival. In colder lands, thick animal furs and hides were tied with sinew, the strong fibers from animal tendons. The fur faced inward for warmth. In hot, dry lands, thin leather soles and plant fibers made light sandals that let air pass through. Each place, each climate, shaped the shoe in its own way.
You can almost trace the map of early humans by the shoes they made. In snowy Siberia, shoes were built to trap warmth. In dry Africa, sandals let the foot breathe. In rocky Europe, sturdy leather soles fought the jagged ground. Shoes became a silent record of how humans met the world. Sometimes they left marks behind, footprints frozen in volcanic ash, like those found in ancient Italy. There, then with faint traces of something tied around them, proof that even back then, people were thinking, adapting, creating. If you close your eyes and imagine, you can almost feel it. The first time a person stepped out into the cold with their feet covered, and the surprise they must have felt. The warmth, the comfort, maybe even a little pride. The first shoes weren't perfect. They broke often. The laces tore, the leather cracked, but people kept fixing them, stitching, tying, learning. That's what makes this story so human. The endless effort to make things better, softer, kinder to our fragile bodies. Even when they didn't have metal needles, they used thorns. When thread didn't exist, they used animal sinew. And when they didn't have patterns, they learned by watching, by feeling. Every stitch in those first shoes was made with care, because each one meant another day of walking, another journey through the unknown. And that's how shoes began, not in workshops or markets, but in the quiet hands of early humans, working by firelight, turning need into creation. The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 2. When animal skins became sandals. After those first pieces of hide were tied around tired feet, something new began to happen. People started thinking about comfort, not just survival. At first, they simply wrapped their feet in whatever they could find: bark, grass, fur, or the skin of a hunted animal. The goal was simple: don't freeze, don't bleed, don't burn. But as time passed, people realized that some materials worked better than others. Thick animal hides were good for cold weather. They kept out wind and snow, but in hot places, they trapped heat and people's feet began to sweat and ache. So in those warmer lands, they started using lighter materials, woven plant fibers, palm leaves, soft reeds from rivers. Imagine someone sitting by a slow, warm river thousands of years ago. Their feet hurt from walking all day. They pick up a handful of reeds, twist them, and tie them together. They place them under their feet and bind them with vines. The surface feels rough, but better than sharp stones. For the first time, they've made something like a sandal. This moment
quiet and ordinary, was one of the first sparks of invention. These early sandals didn't look like modern ones. They were uneven, awkward, and fragile. But they worked. Step by step, they made life easier, and that was enough. People learned by doing. Every time a sandal tore apart, they fixed it better. Every time the rope slipped loose, they tied it tighter. Slowly, the idea took shape. The sole for walking and straps to hold it in place. That shape, a flat base with bindings, hasn't changed much in thousands of years. Even the shoes we wear now still follow that same old logic. In the lands of the Middle East, where the sun burned the sand white, sandals became a way of life. Ancient Egyptians, for example, were masters of simplicity and craft. They took dried papyrus, the same plant they used for writing, and wove it into flat soles. Then they used leather or braided fibers to make straps.
At first, only the rich or high-ranked wore them. Ordinary farmers walked barefoot most of the time. But even so, sandals slowly became symbols, signs of work, of status, even of ceremony. In Egyptian tombs, archaeologists have found sandals laid beside the dead, as if the person would need them for the journey beyond. Some of these sandals were beautifully made. Gold-wrapped leather, painted designs, fine weaving. But others, simpler ones, were made for walking in daily life. If you looked closely at one, you'd see careful stitching. The maker must have sat quietly, smoothing the leather with their hands, punching tiny holes, threading the cord. It wasn't rushed. It was patient work, something that gave both purpose and pride. Far to the north, where the lands were colder and wetter, shoes took another form. In places like what we now call Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, people wore moccasin-like shoes made of soft animal hides. They were shaped like pouches, pulled tight around the ankle with a strip of leather. They were simple but warm. You could walk in snow or mud and still keep your feet dry. Sometimes people stuffed them with dried grass for insulation, like a natural sock. The idea of layers was already there, even if they didn't have the word for it. Everywhere humans went, shoes followed, changing to fit the land beneath them. The people of Mesopotamia, one of the first great civilizations, walked on sun-baked clay streets. Their sandals were practical and flat, made from tough leather that can handle heat. Some even had toe straps, like modern flip-flops. It's strange how something so old can feel so familiar. But the Mesopotamians didn't just make sandals to protect their feet. They also decorated them. Patterns were carved into the soles so that each step left the design in the dust. Imagine that. Footprints that told a story. In the cold mountains between Asia and Europe, travelers wore shoes built from thick layers of leather stitched with animal sinew. Some of these shoes were discovered frozen in ice, like those worn by Ötzi the Iceman, a man who lived more than 5,000 years ago. His shoes were incredible. The outer layer was deer hide, the inner filled with grass for warmth. The soles were made of bearskin, tough and thick. Even after thousands of years in ice, his shoes still told a story of craftsmanship, care, and survival. You can picture him climbing rocky slopes, the sound of snow crunching underfoot, every step steady because of the shoes he made. Humans began to understand that shoes were more than coverings. They were tools. They could carry someone farther, faster, safer. They could be repaired, improved, shared. And as communities grew, tribes becoming villages, villages becoming towns, there were people who became known for making them. The first shoemakers. They didn't have shops or tools like we have now, just simple stones, bone awls for punching holes and strips of sinew. But they had skill. They learned how to soften leather with smoke, how to shape soles to fit better. Each pair they made was a quiet piece of progress. In these small acts of making, something else was happening, a connection between the person and their creation. The shoemaker wasn't just protecting feet. They were shaping journeys, comfort, and freedom. When people could walk farther without pain, they could explore more. They could trade, hunt, build, and grow. The simple shoe quietly changed human history, step by step. By this time, around 3000 BC, shoes had spread through much of the known world, from Egypt's golden sands to Europe's forests. Every culture had its own style, its own answer to the question, how do we protect the foot and still move freely? Some used rawhide, some used wools and plants, some stitched in layers for warmth, others left them open for air. But in every case, the idea was the same, comfort in movement. And with comfort came expression. The first sandals of kings, the patterned soles of priests, the fur-lined boots of hunters, all different, yet all born from the same human need. The story of the first shoes isn't really about leather or rope or animal skin. It's about humans. No matter how long ago, looked at the world and thought, we can make this easier. They didn't wait for invention to come from the sky. They built it with their hands. One strip lied, one knot of fiber, one quiet stitch at a time.
The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 3, When Shoemaking Became an Art. By the time the first cities were built, shoes had already begun to change shape, just as people had changed their ways of living. In the early villages along the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, shoemaking had become more than survival. It was now a skill, a trade, something that belonged to the rhythm of daily life. In Egypt, where golden sand met the slow blue river, the shoemakers worked in quiet corners of the marketplace. Their stalls smelt of tanned leather and oil. You could hear the soft tapping of tools against hide, the scrape of a knife shaping a sole. Each sandal was made by hand, no machines, no rush, just patience. The leather came from cattle, sometimes dyed with natural colors from plants or clay. Straps were measured carefully to fit the wearer's foot, not too tight, not too loose. The craftsman would soak the leather in water to make it soft, then let it dry slowly in the sun so it would harden into shape. It wasn't only about comfort. In Egypt, shoes said something about who you were. The poor often went barefoot or wore simple woven sandals. The priests, who walked in temples, wore white sandals made from papyrus and leather, pure and clean like the rituals they performed. Pharaohs, on the other hand, had sandals of gold thread, embroidered with symbols of gods and power. One famous pair of sandals found in the tomb of King Tutankhamun had soles decorated with images of his enemies. When the young king walked, he quite literally just stepped on his foes, a small but powerful symbol hidden beneath his feet. Still, Even the grandest Egyptian sandals shared one thing with the humblest pair. They were made by hand, one careful stitch at a time. Far to the east, in Mesopotamia, the art of shoemaking grew alongside writing, farming, and trade. People began to use patterns, shapes traced on leather for cutting, to make shoes fit better. Some even used decorative stitching and dyes to show family symbols or tribal marks. The shoemaker's workshop was a small, quiet world, a shaded space, cool from the sun. Pieces of leather lay on a flat stone table, thin cords hung from pegs. The craftsman's hands moved slowly, not rushing, not speaking much. Each movement had its own rhythm, like a song only the shoemaker knew. In the background, children played, traders bargained, and animals stirred. But the shoemaker worked in peace, making something meant to carry another person through life.
As time went on, the craft spread westward, through the ancient Mediterranean. The Greeks took the sandal and made it elegant. They cared about beauty as much as function. Greek sandals were simple but graceful, 2 or 3 straps perfectly cut, often tied around the calf in a spiral. There were sandals for athletes, for philosophers, for travelers. Even the famous thinkers, men like Socrates or Aristotle, wore soft leather sandals as they walked through shaded courtyards, talking about the soul and the stars. To the Greeks, shoes became a part of daily ritual. Before entering temples, they removed their sandals to show respect. When mourning, they went barefoot to show humility. Each action, each gesture carried meaning. And when Greece faded and Rome rose, the shoe evolved again. Roman shoemakers were among the most skilled of the ancient world. They had names for every style: Calceus, Solea, Crepida. There were shoes for soldiers, for senators, for slaves. Every class had its own kind. The Roman caligae, the heavy, open-laced boots worn by soldiers, were strong and practical. Thick soles were studded with small iron nails that bit into the ground, giving grip during long marches. You could hear them coming, the clatter of hobnails on stone roads, a sound that echoed across empires. Civilian shoes, on the other hand, were softer. Leather dyed red or black, shaped perfectly to the foot. Some had delicate stitching. Others were ornamented with metal clasps or colored straps. Shoemaking became a profession, organized, respected, and passed down through families. The suitor or shoemaker was seen as a craftsman of both comfort and beauty. In busy Roman towns, you could walk through narrow streets lined with workshops, bakers, potters, weavers, and shoemakers all side by side. The shoemaker's shop was often open to the street so passers-by could stop, watch, and maybe buy a new pair. Inside, the air smelled of leather and oil. You might see piles of scraps, a few wooden lasts, foot-shaped molds used to shape the shoes, and tools made of bone or bronze. Each pair took time. First, the leather was soaked and cleaned. Then it was cut into pieces using a sharp blade. Holes were punched for stitching. The upper part was sewn to the sole, and the edges were smoothed with ash and oil. It was slow, patient work, but when finished, the shoe wasn't just a thing. It was a small piece of someone's journey, a silent companion for their steps.
As time went on, the craft spread westward through the ancient Mediterranean. The Greeks took the sandal and made it elegant. They cared about beauty as much as function. Greek sandals were simple but graceful. 2 or 3 straps, perfectly cut, often tied around the calf in a spiral. There were sandals for athletes, for philosophers, for travelers. Even the famous thinkers, men like Socrates or Aristotle, wore soft leather sandals as they walked through shaded courtyards, talking about the soul and the stars. To the Greeks, shoes became a part of daily ritual. Before entering temples, they removed their sandals to show respect. When mourning, they went barefoot to show humility. Each action, each gesture carried meaning. And when Greece faded and Rome rose, the shoe evolved again. Roman shoemakers were among the most skilled of the ancient world. They had names for every style: Calceus, Solea, Crepida. There were shoes for soldiers, for senators, for slaves. Every class had its own kind. The Roman caligae, the heavy, open-laced boots worn by soldiers, were strong and practical. Thick soles were studded with small iron nails that bit into the ground, giving grip during long marches. You could hear them coming, the clatter of hobnails on stone roads, a sound that echoed across empires. Civilian shoes, on the other hand, were softer, leather, dyed red or black, shaped perfectly to the foot. Some had delicate stitching, others were ornamented with metal clasps or colored straps. Shoemaking became a profession, organized, respected, and passed down through families.
The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 4, When Shoes Began to Speak. As centuries passed, people changed, and so did their shoes. The world grew larger, kingdoms rose, roads stretched across lands, and trade began to bring faraway things close together. And quietly, the shoe changed from a simple tool into a small, beautiful piece of human identity. When you think about it, every civilization left its footprint, quite literally. In ancient China, shoes became soft, elegant things. Instead of leather, many were made from cloth, linen, hemp, or silk, woven by hand, and sometimes embroidered with tiny, delicate patterns. Flowers, clouds, waves, small pieces of art carried by every step. They weren't only made for walking, they were also made for beauty. A woman's shoes might match the color of her robe, or be made as gifts for weddings and festivals. They were light, almost weightless, made for gentle steps inside courtyards rather than long journeys. In colder parts of Asia, Mongolia, Siberia, the northern steppes, shoes took another form entirely. Thick boots of felt and fur were stitched tight to keep out snow and wind. Nomads who lived on horseback shaped their boots with upturned toes so they wouldn't slip through stirrups. These weren't shoes for show. They were tools for life on the move, for traveling far across endless white plains. Yet even those boots had beauty. The tops were often lined with colored fabric, and the seams decorated with careful stitching. No matter where you looked, people couldn't help adding a touch of care, even to the simplest thing. In Europe, after the fall of Rome, the world grew quieter, rougher. Roads broke apart, cities shrank, and trade slowed. People made what they needed, often by hand, from what they had. Shoes became humble again, rough leather stitched with thick thread. Farmers, blacksmiths, and shepherds all wore similar pairs. They weren't made to impress. They were made to last through work and weather. But even then, small details showed who someone was. The rich had softer leather, The poor had coarser hide. The nobility began to wear longer pointed shoes, sometimes so long they curled at the end, a style called poulain. It might sound funny now, but back then, those long pointed shoes were a mark of elegance and class. Some were so long they had to be tied to the wearer's leg with a thin chain to keep them from tripping. The longer the tip, the higher the status. In royal courts, people noticed shoes. They noticed color, shape, and polish. A king's shoes were as important as his crown, a sign of wealth and dignity. And yet, far from the castles, in small villages surrounded by quiet forests, people still made shoes the old way. They soaked leather in water, cut it by hand, and sewed it with bone needles. The shoes were plain but sturdy, meant for long walks in fields and muddy roads.
If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The sound of a shoemaker's hammer in a small wooden cottage. Tap, tap, tap. The smell of leather. The low light of a candle. The quiet patience of someone shaping a shoe by hand. By the Middle Ages, shoemaking had become a respected craft across Europe. Guilds, groups of skilled workers, began to form. Each guild protected its secrets. How to treat leather, how to shape a sole, how to make a shoe fit just right. Becoming a shoemaker wasn't easy. Apprentices would start young, sometimes as children, learning to cut, measure, and stitch for years before being called a master. Their tools were simple: a wooden last shaped like a foot, sharp knives, an awl for piercing holes, and thick, waxed thread. Yet, what they made carried people through every part of life, from work to worship, from weddings to funerals. Shoes became part of the story of being human, the silent witness to every path we've walked. And slowly, something else began to happen. Shoes started to separate, not just by class, but by gender, by fashion, by purpose. Men's shoes grew practical, sturdy, strong, built for travel or work. Women's shoes became delicate, narrow, often made for indoors. Wealthy women in cities wore soft slippers, embroidered with gold thread. Peasants wore heavy boots, made to survive rain and mud. The materials changed too. Cobblers began to use wooden soles, sometimes mixed with leather or cloth. In the north, where snow never stopped, shoes were lined with wool or fur. In the south, light sandals still carried echoes of the Old World, the memory of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And through trade, across the Silk Road, ideas and styles began to travel. A merchant in Venice might wear shoes inspired by Arabia. A traveler from Persia might wear sandals that once came from India. The world was mixing quietly, beautifully, through every pair of shoes. In Japan, wooden clogs called gata lifted the foot above rain and mud. The sound of them, a calm clack-clack on stone, became part of the rhythm of life. In India, sandals called paduka were carved from wood and sometimes decorated with silver or gems. In the Middle East, soft leather slippers curved upward at the toes, light, silent, graceful. Everywhere, people built shoes around the same truth: the foot's need for comfort and the heart's love of beauty. If you look closely, you'll notice something remarkable. Even though the world was vast and people spoke different languages, the shape of the shoe stayed nearly the same: a sole, a cover, a tie. The human foot hadn't changed, and neither had our wish to protect it. It's strange how something so small, just a simple shoe, carries within it the whole story of civilization. Every era left its own print. The Egyptians gave us order and craft. The Greeks gave us balance and form. The Romans gave us strength and structure. The medieval shoemakers gave us patience and skill. Step by step, stitch by stitch, the shoe became part of who we are. When you think about it, we've been walking the story for thousands of years, through dust and snow, across deserts and stone. And through it all, the shoe has been there, quiet, humble, loyal.
The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 5, When Shoes Found Their Voice. As the long shadows of the Middle Ages lifted, the world began to wake again. Cities grew brighter, trade routes opened wider, and art and music filled the air. This was the time we now call the Renaissance, a rebirth of beauty, ideas, and curiosity. And like everything else, shoes began to change too. For the first time, people didn't just want shoes that worked, they wanted shoes that spoke. Shoes that said something about who they were, what they believed in, or how high they stood in the world. In Italy, where the Renaissance first bloomed, shoemakers became artists in their own right. The streets of Florence and Venice were filled with new designs, fine leather dyed in deep reds, greens, and golds. Slippers were cut low, showing the curve of the foot. Boots were soft, elegant, and often embroidered. The wealthy and noble wore shoes with delicate patterns burned into the leather, and women's shoes often matched the colors of their dresses. But not all shoes were light or graceful. Some were tall, very tall. In Venice, women wore platform shoes called cecchines. They could be a half-foot high, sometimes even higher. These weren't shoes for walking long distances. They were shoes to be seen in. When a lady walked through the streets, she seemed to float above the crowd, her gown flowing down like a wave. Servants sometimes helped her walk, holding her steady. It might seem strange now, but back then, height meant importance. The higher your shoes, the higher your status. Meanwhile, in Spain and France, shoes became sharp, narrow, and pointed again. People called them poulines or cracows, named after the city of Krakow in Poland. The points were long, sometimes absurdly so, but elegant in their way. Shoemakers had to be clever to make them fit properly, often using stiffened leather or even metal inside the tips. And still, despite their impractical shape, people adored them, because fashion has never been about comfort. It's always been about expression.
And so the shoe began to whisper louder. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about personality. In the courts of France, shoes sparkled with jewels. In England, men's boots rose high, folded at the top, and sometimes even had little bows. King Louis XIV of France, known as the Sun King, famously wore red-heeled shoes, a color that soon became a symbol of nobility. Only those in royal favor were allowed to wear them. When he walked through his golden halls, the sound of his shoes, the soft tap of leather on marble, became part of his presence, his power. But away from the glittering courts, life was simpler. Farmers, traders, and craftsmen still wore sturdy shoes made by local cobblers. Their shoes didn't shine or sparkle, but they lasted. Thick soles, rough stitching, heavy leather. Shoes meant for work, not display. In small towns, the cobbler's shop was a quiet refuge. People came in with worn-out shoes, asking for new soles or fresh stitching. The cobbler would sit by the window, tapping and stitching, while the light slanted across his bench. Each pair had a story, a traveler's dust, a child's scuff marks, a farmer's cracked heel. The cobbler didn't need grand titles. He made things that touched the earth. By now, shoemaking had grown into a full profession. Guilds and workshops existed in almost every city. Techniques were passed down through generations, from father to son, from master to apprentice. New tools appeared: curved awls, methylasts, strong waxed linen thread. Shoemakers began to shape shoes more carefully, curving them to the natural arch of the foot. For the first time, shoes were made for the left and right foot separately. A small but meaningful change that made walking smoother, more natural. In the North, boots became the standard. Tall leather boots for riding and work. Soldiers wore them on long marches. Travelers through cold lands depended on them. Some had straps and buckles. Others had buttons or laces, an idea just beginning to spread. And in the warmth of southern Europe, sandals survived, lighter, simpler, still breathing the air of ancient Greece. Over in Asia, the art of shoemaking continued its own quiet evolution. In China, silk shoes for the noble classes were richly embroidered with gold thread. The patterns weren't random. Each carried meaning. Flowers for love, cranes for long life, clouds for peace. The soles were often made of many layers of cloth stitched together by hand, soft but strong. In Japan, wooden geta and straw zori continued to echo across gardens and wooden floors. The sound of them became a kind of music, a rhythm of daily life, marking each careful step. Even in the Middle East and North Africa, slippers made from soft leather, known as babouche, became symbols of grace. Their curved toes and gentle colors spoke of calm and tradition, a design that still survives today. Through trade, these styles began to mingle. A merchant from the East might bring slippers to Europe. A traveler from the West might bring boots to the Orient. The world was beginning to share itself, and shoes, like everything else, became a bridge between cultures. And then came a change that would shape everything: the rise of machines. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution began to hum and roar. For thousands of years, every shoe had been made by hand. But now, with machines to stitch and cut, shoemaking would never be the same. At first, people resisted. Cobblers and craftsmen feared losing their art. But machines made shoes faster, cheaper, and easier to sell. What had once taken a week could now be done in hours. Factories rose in towns and cities. The smell of leather filled the air, but the sound was no longer just one man's tapping. It was the clatter of hundreds of machines. Shoes became something everyone could afford. Ordinary people who had worn one pair until it fell apart could now buy two, maybe even three. Style spread across continents. Boots for soldiers, slippers for the home, polished shoes for city life. The old shoemaker's bench grew quiet. Some still worked by hand, keeping the graft alive, but many joined the new factories, stitching the future, one sole at a time. And through it all, the story of the shoe never lost its heart. Even in a world of noise and iron, people still cared about the small things: the softness of leather, the curve of a seam, the comfort of a walk. That's what's remarkable about shoes. They change with time, but their purpose never does. They're still about that same simple feeling: to take a step without pain, to move freely, to go wherever life leads. From the golden sandals of kings to the rough boots of workers, from hand stitching to machines, the shoe has always carried us forward, quietly, faithfully, step by step. The Tale of the First Shoes, Part 6, The Road to Now. As the 19th century began to unfold, the sound of footsteps changed again. In cities filled with smoke and steam, shoes clicked on stone pavements, splashed through puddles, and left marks on wooden factory floors. People no longer made shoes just to survive. Now they made them to match their lives, to fit who they were becoming. In London and Paris, shoes became part of fashion's heartbeat. Polished leather boots for men, delicate button-up shoes for women. Shops lined with boxes, each pair waiting for a new owner. The smell of fresh leather became a symbol of progress, of the modern world moving forward. Across the ocean in America, the story took a new turn. Factories grew bigger, and railroads carried shoes to every corner of the country. Companies began to print catalogs, showing drawings of the latest styles: lace-up boots, Oxford shoes, walking slippers. For the first time, you could order shoes by mail, and they would arrive at your door like a small piece of the wider world. By the late 1800s, shoes were no longer handmade treasures for the few. They were everyday companions for everyone. Still, the old cobblers didn't disappear completely. In quiet corners of cities and small towns, they kept their benches, their wooden lasts, and their soft tapping hammers. They became keepers of the past. If a heel cracked or a sole split, you didn't throw away the shoe, you took it to the cobbler. He would patch it up, give it new life. Each repair carried a story, like scars on an old traveler's hands. Then came the 20th century, and the world started moving faster. Factories now produced millions of pairs. New materials appeared: rubber for soles, canvas for light shoes, and synthetic fabrics that could bend and stretch. Sports and movement became part of everyday life, and so did the shoes that followed. In 1917, one simple design changed everything: the Converse All-Star. It was light, flexible, and perfect for basketball. But soon it left the court and became a symbol of youth and freedom. Later came the running shoes, the leather boots of soldiers in two great wars, and the shining black shoes that marched through the city streets of peace. Each step marked its time. In the 1950s and 60s, fashion exploded. Shoes became wild: bright colors, high heels, pointed toes, platforms, and sneakers. They reflected music, rebellion, love, and individuality. A person's shoes could tell their story before they even spoke. Through all of this, something quietly human remained: that simple connection between foot and earth, between person and path. Think about it for a moment. Every shoe you've ever worn has shared your journey. From your first steps as a child, wobbling and unsure, to your long walks through rain or dust, your shoes have carried your weight, your dreams, your tiredness. Each scuff and crease is a tiny memory of a place, a moment, a day. In the late 20th century, brands began to shape identity. Shoes weren't just tools. They became expressions. A polished Oxford meant professionalism. A sneaker meant energy and youth. A boot might mean independence. A slipper might mean peace. And yet, even as the world grew more digital, the craft of shoemaking never vanished. In quiet workshops from Italy to Japan, from Bangladesh to Spain, artisans still sit at their benches, cutting, stitching, and shaping leather by hand. They still know how to feel the weight of a shoe, how to match it to a foot, how to make something that lasts. Some shoes now are made by machines in seconds. Others take weeks, carefully hand-stitched by people who learned from generations before them. And when you hold such a shoe in your hands, you can still sense that ancient heartbeat, the echo of the first sandals, the first ropes, the first skins wrapped around human feet. Today, shoes come in every shape imaginable. There are shoes that can climb mountains, shoes that glow in the dark, shoes made from recycled plastic pulled from the ocean. There are shoes for astronauts, shoes for dancers, and shoes that connect to smartphones. And yet, deep down, they are all the same thing. A simple shell of comfort between us and the ground we walk on. Maybe that's why the story of shoes feels so familiar, because it's not just about leather and stitches. It's about movement. It's about journeys. It's about being human. Thousands of years ago, a person stood on sharp stones and thought, I wish I could walk farther without pain. And that thought, small, humble, human, began everything. Every step since then has been part of that same story, from the hunter with his animal hide sandals to the queen in her golden slippers, to you tying your laces before heading out into the world. The shoes you wear today carry not just your steps, but the steps of everyone who came before. So maybe next time you slip your feet into your shoes, take a slow breath and imagine the path that led there, from caves and fires to cities and streets, from soft leather to bright sneakers. Every pair of shoes is a quiet story told in motion. And this tale, the tale of the first shoes, never really ends. It just keeps walking, softly, endlessly, into tomorrow.